Hello, welcome once again to Senior Focus. I'm your host, Bill Adams. Senior Focus is a show designed for folks over the age of about 50 or so. But of course, if you're under that age, you can feel free to watch because we have information that could help you or a member of your family. Before we get started, though, I wanted to thank a couple people. One is Greg Roten, who is from Armstrong Cable, and he allows the show to come to you a couple times a month. Actually, we're on every day, but we film 2 shows a month. And also thanks to Keith Kaiser, who brings us or allows us to use the Davis Visitor Center. Today we're in the library of the Davis Center. And of course, if you're in the area, drop by the Davis Center and anywhere in Mill Creek Park. There's so many things to do and places to go in the park, and it's really a treasure. So, use your park. That's why it's there. Today we're going to be talking with Jim Crawford. Jim is a volunteer with AARP, and I know a lot of, all of us have heard of AARP, but we're going to talk about some opportunities if you wanted to volunteer with AARP or get more information. It's a treasure trove, I guess.
It is.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And first of all, let's just talk a little bit about your background. You were in higher education.
Yes, I'm a retired administrator from Ohio University.
And welcome to the area. I know you've been here for a little while.
Thank you.
And how did you get involved with AARP? What was the genesis of that?
Well, about 5 years ago, I was concerned about the key issues of Social Security and Medicare protection. Mm-hmm. And AARP represented the largest lobbying group that was in the same perspective as I felt was important in protecting those entities. So I sought out AARP Ohio for volunteering opportunities. Mm-hmm. It's turned out that there are many more volunteering opportunities than I might ever have suspected.
So once you volunteered, they were real happy to see you, I imagine.
It's been a happy experience, at least on my end, and I hope on theirs as well.
Yeah, and we'll give out the phone number here. There's an 800 number. The office is in Columbus. It's 866-389-5653, and we'll give that out again towards the end of the show if you're interested in contacting the state office in Columbus.
There are still volunteering opportunities, and they're good. It's good work.
Well, when you talk about volunteer opportunities, you speak, I guess, to groups. You go around the area and speak?
Right now, our volunteers are organized into 3 types of functions. We have a speakers bureau, which represents us on AARP on topics like fraud watch and caregiving. Mm-hmm. And we have those people who are advocates for legislative activity. Mm-hmm. For instance, the A.A.R.P Act is coming before the Ohio legislature this year.
Okay.
And we have volunteer advocates who make long-term connections with political office holders to be sure that the AARP views get advanced as best and clearly as they can. Mm-hmm. And then the third project we have is program directors who engage in community events and in a variety of ways. We might do a document shedding event where we invite people to bring documents that should be safely disposed of. Mm-hmm. And we have people who direct those projects that are volunteers. Okay.
Well, I was really interested in the, you're talking about working on legislation because I've always felt that, the more citizens that are involved and the more they get involved in legislation, the better it's going to turn out. Legislators, basically, they have to know everything. I mean, if you think about all the different topics, so they can't be experts in everything. And that's where, individual citizens bring, knowledge of a subject, more in-depth knowledge, to the legislators. We're going to talk about, I think, 3 different things today. One is potential rate increase for people that are anybody who uses electricity. A second thing is the Caregiver Act to help all you out there who are caregivers. Yes. And then also Fraud Watch, which is very important, not only to seniors but other folks.
It is.
How about the rate increase? Can you talk a little bit about what's the background of that?
Well, last year, First Energy had approached PUCO with a request for a 15-year subsidy to support the conversion of a number of older coal-producing energy plants over time. Mm-hmm. And that was rejected. And First Energy has come back again now with a proposal for an 8-year plan to provide a subsidy, which they've termed a settlement in an interesting, coining a phrase, with the effect of, again, granting those plants a time period to 2030 to convert from coal to natural gas. So that's the background for it. The setting is that the reason it was rejected by the PUCO previously may be the same reasons why it might not be considered now.
Okay. Now, this is going to affect everybody, I guess, who, again, purchases electricity. It would increase rates in some respect, or how would that work?
Well, the pass-through cost to consumers for the salvaging of these obsolete plants would be somewhere in the vicinity of $2 to $3 billion over the 8-year period, which translates on a basis of a household to about $10.50 a month in increased utility cost.
Okay.
And while there are certainly people who can absorb $10.50 a month, there are people who struggle with that, who are younger workers, who are not earning as much as they will in the future, or older workers who are on fixed income, or retired workers who don't have the opportunity to take on additional expenses. So
Right.
$126 a year to someone who has a zero increase in Social Security income this year is simply a reduction in money they have to spend on other necessities.
Right, and we're coming off of that, of course, as you said, zero increase in Social Security, and unfortunately, a lot of people are totally reliant on that.
Yes.
So, so what have you done, or what has AARP been doing, on this issue?
AARP's been actively seeking to protect consumers, and in our audience of consumers, much like your show, we target groups of people who are 50 or older for many of our programs, and some younger groups of people for other programs, but certainly for those who are 50 or older, representing them and protecting their need to keep costs down and get efficient and effective delivery of energy, which ought to be the first energy goal as well as the goal for consumers. We ought to be in lockstep with that. So AARP's working to, perhaps in a sense, remind First Energy of its first priority. If you're first at this, the first priority is being efficient and effective for consumer. The problem is when you have coal plants that are built in the 1950s and 60s, you can't do that. Bill, my first car was a 1956 Ford.
Okay.
I remember it well. It didn't have an automatic transmission. It didn't have air conditioning. It didn't have seat belts. It was a good car for 1956.
Right.
It was built about the same time as these power plants.
Okay.
But would you want a 56 Ford today?
Probably not, unless in a kind of a you're shining it up for a car show.
And if you owned that 56 Ford and you were shining up for a car show today, and someone came to you and said, I can make that 56 Ford as efficient as a Chevrolet Volt. How much do you think it would cost to do that?
Less than it would cost to buy the Volt, or to develop something new.
Actually, as it turns out, it would probably cost more to make a 56 Ford into a Volt than it would be to buy a Volt.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
And it costs less today to open a new natural gas plant than it does to convert an obsolete coal plant.
So that's what you're discussing with legislators, or with the
Well, right now it's at the
PUCO?
PUCL, and we would encourage, from AARP's perspective, we would encourage all consumers to contact PUCO and let them know that they're not, if they agree with us, that they're not excited about seeing their utility bill go up. One of the other conflictions I think that First Energy has here is that in 1999, Ohio converted its utilities to being non-regulated. And the utilities advanced this argument, and successfully so, that if they were not regulated, then they would be free to buy energy on the open market at best price, and that would save consumers money.
Sounds good.
It does sound good, and it worked. But now, when First Energy comes back today and says, but we're going to need a subsidy, that's a return to the old way of regulated and controlled, because that subsidy means, in spite of energy prices that may continue to go down, consumers in the First Energy system, of which there are about 1.3 million,
Okay.
their prices won't go down because they'll be subsidizing these power plants.
So there was good news, but there isn't good news because of the subsidy.
Well, the only people that are good news for is First Energy getting consumers to subsidize the recreation of obsolete power plants, which, frankly, probably aren't needed because there's ample energy available. And there's good news for those communities where those obsolete plants exist because that's a tax base for them and it's jobs. So those things matter to those people and those are viable interests. But by the same token, you really can't continue to support, for instance, a buggy whip factory today because it keeps jobs. Because there's still no demand for buggy whips.
Right.
You can't continue to support an obsolete coal plant that was built in the 1950s when there's no demand for an inefficient plant. These plants have an estimated production cap, so that a plant built in 1956 might be able to produce whatever number of megawatt of electricity, optionally. But its efficiency rate, its effectiveness rate, is no longer near that optimal number.
Okay.
So that plant might be theoretically able to produce 500 megawatts. But in practice, because of age and inefficiency, it can only produce maybe half that.
Okay. So what is the timetable for the PUCO to act on this? Do we know when they might make a decision, or, you know? What?
I do not know when they will make the decision. I do know that input is important, and input is important now on a timely basis.
Right. So sometime the end of this year, early next year?
No sooner than early next year, I think.
2016, okay. And if people are interested, they can contact the PUCO, which, again, you can go online, you know, to get their contact information. Or, again, we gave out the AARP number. I guess can call the AARP state office.
Sure.
And they can certainly hook you up. If
The most important thing is consumers can make all the difference in the world. They really can, because if they decide that this is not an investment they want to make, not a cost they want to absorb, then they need to say so. And they will make a difference if they come forth and say so. AARP supports that and hopes that there'll be enough consumers to stand with us, that PUCO will see this as not an opportunity, but as a risk that is not good for consumers.
Okay, and so that obviously, again, electric rates will affect older adults, but another topic that affects almost all older adults at some point would be caregiving. And you have, I guess AARP is spearheading a Caregiver Act, is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Let me speak to just the general issue of caregiving first. There are an estimated 42 million caregivers today in the United States, of a population of just slightly over 3 million. That's a pretty significant percentage of us who at some point in our lives will be caregivers for other family members. And that is a wonderful thing in a couple of regards. It's certainly a wonderful thing from AARP's perspective in that it allows people to live their lives out in their homes.
Where most people would,
Where
sure.
most people, about 80% of people, want to live their life out in their homes. And so that's an important function of the willingness of folks to be caregivers. But the caregiving role is a demanding, often terribly stressful role. So caregivers often find themselves doing things that they've not been trained for, taking on stress and relative worries of caring for someone else without having necessarily the background for it. And with the natural stress of having to just assume a role that they'd never really projected for themselves in their lives.
Yeah, if I remember reading the information, you mentioned how many in the country, but 1.5 million almost in Ohio, people that are caregiving, and most of the time they're juggling the job, you know, they're working, they're coming home. So with, you know, I know AARP has worked on this at the national level. So in Ohio, they have, proposed legislation?
Yes. 2 states have already passed a CARE Act, and those states are Oklahoma and Hawaii.
Okay.
In Ohio, AARP is supporting and advancing a CARE Act this year, hopefully. We strongly hope it'll be this year. And it has essentially 3 components. The first is that when someone enters into a care situation, hospital or rehab center, that a care support person is named and made aware of the facility. So the facility knows there's a care support patient for this person.
Okay, they're like the lead.
They're like the lead.
Okay, for that family.
Exactly.
Okay.
The second factor is that care person, support person, is kept aware of the patient, should he or she be transferred, if a release is due, and all the circumstances relating to that person, that the care provider is kept in that loop. The third provision, and this is critically important, is that when a release comes and a person who's going to be leaving a facility to go home for care, and often extended care, that the care provider is given a thorough review of the medications that are going to be used, how to disperse those medications. There may be equipment that's used, how to use the equipment, and demonstrated how to use the equipment that they may have to use.
Right.
And then the same, of course, with the equipment and the care and the medication is the actual things like wound care and bandaging, so that they see modeled how to do these things. Because if we don't do that, we're asking family to do things they've never been prepared for, they're not trained for, and are often professionally provided services. So the care bill, we hope Ohio will address this year, would ensure that care facilities, hospitals, and recovery centers provide this basic foundational work so that care providers can have a greater degree of confidence and a greater degree of understanding and knowledge about what they'll be asked to do.
Well, you would think that this would be not standard, well, you would hope it'd be standard practice, but it isn't, obviously. But it would be good practice at the hospital level. I think of like discharge planners. And I know exactly what this is trying to get at because I've been involved in family situations and also, on a professional level. But you've got people who, they have a crisis, a fall or an accident or injury, and then now they're in the hospital, and you've got the family scrambling, what do we do in a week or less than, sometimes it's tomorrow.
Right.
And so that's what this is trying to get at, is that emergency situation. You've got a person maybe going back to the home. It's about education and about training the home caregivers, the family caregivers, and what to do so they're not flailing, I guess.
Yes, and I think it should be said, in fairness to some of the hospitals in Ohio, have really advanced far along this path.
Right.
So
many of them are doing this already.
Many of them are doing most or parts of this.
Okay.
The component that is least in place in Ohio so far, but is not far from the horizon, is the actual showing by practice things like wound care and using of medical equipment.
Right.
So medication coverage has been pretty well advanced, and in many good hospitals that's already taking place, that a care provider is being walked through the medications, why those are medications that are provided, how to dispense them. The other two elements of wound care and medical equipment have not been quite universally adopted in terms of teaching, showing, demonstrating. And I'm sure you know this from all of us dealing with this issue of healthcare for each other, I picture so many folks, he goes into the doctor's office, she waits in the car. He comes out and she says, "So, what happened?" He says, "Well, they're putting me on 3 new drugs." And she says, "Great, what are they?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." And because of those names, you may not be able to repeat the names. They're pharmaceutical names, they're industry names, they're difficult names. So pretty soon you can't name it. And the next thing she says is, "Well, what do they do?" "Well, they're going to help me."
Yeah,
because we don't know that, a particular drug may be to dilate a blood vessel to help your heart flow blood at a better rate, even though you have a reduced capacity.
Right.
So,
or what are the possible side effects?
Exactly, we don't know those either. So we're not so all too often able to articulate those things. So if we can't articulate those things to our loved ones, it's difficult for them to know the importance and significance of, for example, missing a dosage. What does it mean if I miss a dosage on a blood thinner? What may mean a great deal more than missing my aspirin in the morning? So I think when we talk about caregiving in the CARE Act, our hope is that we give the kind of support to care providers that they really essentially need. One more issue on that I think we found, in Ohio we provide, offer seminars to the general public on caregiving.
Okay.
And they're behaviorally based, which is to say there are a lot of folks out there who are offering good knowledge and information about how to support care providers. But what we've found is an area of need is for providers to talk through us with each other.
Sure.
And here's the interesting thing that happens in that conversation, is that many times they'll find out that there are resources available that someone on this side of the table is aware of that I'm not aware of.
Sure.
And those resources may be available in Cincinnati, but not in Columbus. They may be available in Cleveland, but not in Youngstown. So they're localized, and by these meetings and exchanges, where we talk to people about both those specific aspects, and then secondly, about the stress and strain of caregiving. People, we find, need to say out loud some of their own hardships and concerns. They need respite.
Right.
They need time to be away, but they also need an opportunity to talk about what it feels like and how stressful it is to be a care provider.
Right. Well, we've had like the Alzheimer's Network locally and other groups, that provide support groups. So that's a similar idea of in-person support groups, but also online, where people, because again, a caregiver can't necessarily get out of the house because they're caring for somebody.
Yes.
But maybe go on the computer and again, talk to other caregivers. So that's something that AARP can hook people into and make it so that folks are talking to other people in their shoes.
Absolutely. Just go to AARP.org, and you can connect to caregiving there just as easily as typing in caregiving, and there is a strong online support network.
Right. And I saw there was a recent episode, I think, on the Today Show where an AARP staff person from the national office was on, and I watched the video, and she went through some of the things that caregivers could use some help in and some tips.
Yes.
So again, that's all on the AARP.org website. And while we're thinking of it, again, if you want to call the state office, it's 866-389-5653. But for now, we're talking with a local volunteer. His name is Jim Crawford. He is with AARP in the Youngstown area as a volunteer. And we've talked about, again, the utility PUCO possible rate increase. We've talked about the Caregiving Act, which is proposed. Now, what are you asking folks to do there? Would they be maybe contacting a legislator? Or
Yes,
okay.
if you support the CARE Act in Ohio, contact your legislator and let them know that.
Okay.
We are very hopeful about this, that the legislators, many of whom are have been caregivers or are caregivers, or have family members who are in this, will understand intuitively the rationality behind this and the reasons why their support is important.
Right. And the other thing maybe we haven't touched on is when you keep people at home, and we've mentioned this quite a bit on Senior Focus, when you keep people at home and out of, say, a nursing home or assisted living setting, you save the state and the taxpayers thousands of dollars a year. So that's, beyond the benefit to seniors who want to stay at home, we all want to do that. There's also a financial benefit to the state and to the taxpayers. And so this would, again, help people to stay at home.
Yes.
Why don't we talk about the Fraud Watch?
Yeah.
I know you talk about that in some of your travels, right?
Yes, I do. Fraud Watch is a project that's really reached across the United States in a variety of ways, and it's happened because both with the expansion of the internet and the sophistication of those who would like to part you from your money, it's come to be necessary and needful to keep people appraised and aware of the latest things that are happening in consumer fraud. And we went from those first layer frauds of the Nigerian prince who wanted to offer me $3 million, and all I really had to do was send him $132,000 to pay the taxes.
What a deal.
To much more sophisticated things where people now will capture your computer screen and say, well, we'll release it because it's been infected and it's all for your own good. Just call this number and we'll charge you a fee to release your computer screen. Yeah. But fraud is more sophisticated too. Identity theft is now the #1 fraud in Ohio. And that's done through phishing and another variety of ways in which people will work hard to get your Social Security number, your bank account number. And their methods are maybe as simple as contacting you with an email address that looks like your bank's address, that has your bank's logo on it, and says there's just a discrepancy in your account, and all we need is your account number to verify that you are the person that we need to communicate with.
Right.
these things cause
well-
us to do this work.
And I was going to say, I've heard also a lot recently about fraudsters who are pretending to be the government in some way, whether it's the Internal Revenue Service or something else. Yeah.
And on a simple level, the Internal Revenue Service is a current one this year, but in the sessions with people that I've talked to. And one of the things that you could say to everyone who's listening to the show today is, if the Internal Revenue Service calls you and says you have to send money to us today, that's not the Internal Revenue Service.
Right, that's fraud.
They will never do that. That is fraud. In Ohio this year, volunteers have done 44 Fraud Watch seminars with folks in communities. And we've gone all the way from groups as small as 8 or 10 to as large as 70 or 100. And these are interactive sessions. We convey some of the things we know about fraud. We have a national statistical database where we collected A.A.R.P. You can sign up to be a Fraud Watch member nationally with us, and we'll keep you appraised of what the latest scams and schemes are in your region. We do this by region and state. So there's that, and then there's also the exchange of finding out locally what people are experiencing. So these interactive sessions, if you see one come to the community, and we've done recently, we were at the Jewish Community Center in Liberty.
Sure.
We had a group of about 70 up there, and that was a good interactive session where people would experience enough instances to share and make it a very rich exchange.
Well, again, just like we were talking about with the caregiving, when you get caregivers together, I'm sure when you get seniors together, it's helpful because, again, you learn from other people what to watch out for.
And as volunteers, we endlessly learn from other people. It's one of the first things you'll learn is that everyone has a story and everybody has some wisdom, and it's good to share it.
So if somebody gets a call like this or something online, where are some places they can go? I'm thinking of maybe the Attorney General or the local police. What do people do if they get a scam sent to them or called?
Well, you actually can call our Fraud Watch Network at the A.A.R.P. Foundation.
Okay.
We have live volunteer operators who will respond, but your Attorney General is always a good call. They are the front line, and the police department is not a bad call. But keep in mind that local forces are limited in what they can do in terms of man and woman power. They have other immediate responsibilities, so the Attorney General is always a really good place.
Well, we have about a minute to go, and another thing maybe is for people who aren't necessarily seniors but are taking care of seniors, any suggestions what they can do to, maybe just educate their own parents or their aunt and uncle, that kind of thing?
Well, I think perhaps the best thing that any of us can do is anticipate that in each life we may have this responsibility facing us. And anticipating that, being cognizant of and learning and paying attention to what information is out there and what support vehicles are available will make you a better provider when that day comes for you.
Okay. Well, again, we've been talking with Jim Crawford. Jim is a volunteer with A.A.R.P. in the Youngstown area. And again, if you want to contact A.A.R.P. at the state level, it's 866-389-5653. You've been watching Senior Focus. We want to thank Greg Roten from Armstrong, Channel 20 and 100 for bringing the show to you, and also Keith Kaiser for allowing us to use the beautiful Davis Visitor Center. And until next time, we want to thank you for watching.